All right, does everybody got some food? At least most people settling down and everything. Thank you everyone for coming. I'm going to put this down because it's awkward for me to hold. My name is Boris Shcharansky. We're really happy to have you here. I'm with the Iowa Hemp Association. I'm also with the Heartland Hemp Company. We're traveling right now. We're sponsoring a national group that's affiliated with the National Hemp Association, and that is the Hemp Road Trip. So along with me I have Trojan, who's in the back. He's a Colorado hemp farmer. We also have Winnie. Where's Winnie? There's Winnie. Winnie's has come here from Kentucky. She's also worked with Mike Lewis, who's a Kentucky hemp farmer and a veteran. Runs a project called the Growing Warriors Project. So we're really happy to have them here as part of the Hemp Road Trip, as well as their support team. So thank you all for coming out. I'm here to really just talk to you a little bit about the history of hemp, a little bit about what's going on in Iowa right now with industrial hemp. Some of the opportunities for farmers, and then I'm going to have Rick talk about his experience growing hemp in Colorado, and also Winnie is going to have a little demonstration. She's actually going to make rope on the spot here using some hemp that she brought from Kentucky. So just a small demonstration. In addition, we have a number of products back here. We have a guitar made out of hemp back here that was signed by Willie Nelson. So that's a big draw. If you want to take some pictures with it, you're absolutely allowed to take pictures with it. We do have a bodyguard for the guitar, though. So, and we don't tell you which one of us it is, so just be careful. We will jump on you if you try to take it. So, with that being said, a little bit about hemp. Now, my projector's not working, so this is the best I can do right now. A little bit about me. I am the CEO of Heartland Hemp Company. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a hemp advocate, registered lobbyist here in Iowa. Although I'm not doing much lobbying this year, we work through a company. I graduated from the University of Pennsylvania, and I've been sort of a small business owner for the last 8 or so years, and I've owned Heartland for the last 2 years. Heartland Hemp Company, we focus on hemp-derived CBD products as well as some hemp consulting and other hemp knickknacks that we sell here locally. Mostly we're involved in advocacy and lobbying at the moment, trying to establish an industrial hemp, re-establish an industrial hemp industry here in Iowa. So what we say is we are dedicated to the re-emergence and the reintroduction of hemp as an agricultural crop here in Iowa. Last year we co-wrote House Bill 470. It's still being technically under consideration in the House, but we're going to have a new bill coming out this year. It was sent to the Public Safety Committee last year, and it ultimately died there. So we weren't even able to get any hearings in front of the Ag Committee or anything. This year we're hoping to change that. So I'm going to go through the history of hemp. I really want to make this a town hall, so I don't want this to be like a speech or a lecture or anything like that. If you guys have questions or anything, just shout them out. If this is boring, let me know that too, and I'll move on. And otherwise, if there is anything that's not clear, if I'm talking too fast, if you just don't like the sound of my voice, just tell me something. So, hemp in history. We've been with the cannabis plant since thousands and thousands of years ago. Since we were hunter-gatherers, we've been traveling with the cannabis plant and been using it for a number of reasons. So the Chinese used it for paper, for some fiber. There's some evidence that they use it for medicinal reasons as well. It followed the Silk Route all the way through Central Asia into Europe. It crossed over with the colonists into North America and South America. And so it's been part of the history of the world, you can put it that way. I mean, wars were fought over hemp. Russia and Britain had a huge misunderstanding because of the French and because of some hemp politics there in terms of hemp being a major source of raw material for sails, for rope, and if you had any sort of power in sort of world history in 1600s, 1700s, 1800s, that power was expressed through your naval power. So it was expressed, the British Empire had the largest and the most successful navy in the world, and that's why they were so powerful. What made them roll, or what made them work, was hemp, because all the cannabis was made out of hemp. It was the most naturally resistant to salt water, and so it was the best choice to use for sails. And all the tonnage of rope that's used on a ship, twine, everything, was made from hemp. So as you can imagine, the raw material in the countries that produced the most amount of hemp held the most amount of power. So that's why you look in Britain, we still have cities like Hempstead. And we have streets named Hemp Walk, and you can drive around the U.S. and you have similar cities named after the British versions, and that's because those are major hemp processing facilities. In the 1800s through to the beginning of the 20th century, Kentucky actually processed and produced 1/3 of the U.S.'s hemp. And it was, again, used from everything from fibers to textiles to oils to everything. Hemp and marijuana. Hemp is a subspecies, well, no, cannabis has multiple different species. Hemp is just a legal classification of the cannabis plant. So everybody always asks, well, there's marijuana, there's hemp, what's the difference? Legally, we have said that anything below 0.3% THC, and THC is what gets you high, that's the marijuana plant. Anything below 0.3% THC, which could not get you high no matter how hard you tried, is considered legally industrial hemp. Which basically means that every single country around the world, except for the United States, has made that distinction. They've said, look, we're not going to grow marijuana, that's still illegal except for some exceptions, but we will grow hemp. So all of Europe grows hemp, China grows hemp, Canada grows hemp, Eastern Europe, Russia, Ukraine, they all grow hemp. Back in our history, the 13 colonies actually depended on hemp. You could pay your taxes in hemp. It was illegal not to grow hemp in the Jamestown colonies because it was so vital to the survival of the early colonists. George Washington and Thomas Jefferson both grew hemp. In fact, Thomas Jefferson smuggled hemp seeds in from France back a couple hundred years ago in order to establish American cultivars of industrial hemp. That's how vital it was to the development of the U.S. Navy, of power, of industry. Towards the end of the 20th century, and especially into the early 20th century, we had never heard of the drug marijuana in the United States. We had cannabis as a medicine. Cannabis oils were sold in pharmacies, but we never had really experienced from a cultural perspective what's called smoked marijuana, so smoking the flowers of marijuana. That came with a major migration from the South. And as with many things, xenophobia took over, and a lot of people started equating immigrants with drugs and immigrants with smoking marijuana. And eventually there's a lot of racism behind the impending prohibition of marijuana. Now, unfortunately, we didn't have the testing back then that we do now. We couldn't distinguish between what's a marijuana plant, what's a hemp plant. We didn't really have that legal distinction. Everything was Indian hemp or everything was a cannabis plant. Nobody ever made the distinction of industrial hemp. So in 1937, when we did actually outlaw marijuana, we outlawed hemp with it. Eventually, over the next decades, countries around the world came around and said, no, we got to separate these two because we can actually use hemp for fiber, for seed, for oil, for a number of raw materials. And different countries started getting away from that. But the U.S. continued in that mindset, even up until 1969 when we reviewed and developed the Controlled Substances Act, which is what we are governed by today. And that's what establishes the drug schedules. That's why, if anybody's familiar with marijuana, it's in Schedule 1. And because hemp is also under the same definition of marijuana, because it's the same species of plant, it also finds itself in Schedule 1. So unlike plants like corn, canola, soy, which are all under the control and the direction of the U.S. Department of Agriculture, hemp, even though it has no drug properties, no psychoactive properties, continues to be under the auspices of the Drug Enforcement Administration. And we've sort of found ourselves in that problem, that quagmire for the last 30 years. Some interesting things about hemp. Before marijuana was made illegal in the 1930s, we had Henry Ford actually create an entire car made out of hemp bioplastic, and he actually created a facility in Iron Mountain, Michigan that was refining hemp cellulose into methanol. So he made the first biofuel car made out of bioplastic back in the 1930s. And the only reason we weren't able to go ahead with that technology is because in 1937 we outlawed the plant. There is one break in the history of hemp, since it's been illegal since 1970 and it was made illegal in 1937. We had a small break though. A lot of people here are aware that Iowa grew hemp in the 1940s. Raise your hand if you knew that. Great. Raise your hand if you didn't know that.
That they grew it or that it grew here?
I taught something today. No, that they grew it in the 1940s. Does anybody know the reason we grew it without reading the slide behind me?
Rope.
Yes, rope. But the reason we started growing it here instead of relying on imports because the Japanese took over the Philippine Islands in 1942. And what happened then was our supply of Manila hemp was gone. So everything we used to create our soldiers' uniforms, to the shoelaces in their shoes, to the parachutes that they parachute out of their planes with, to the lubricants and the engine oil, was all made from the hemp plant. So it was desperately needed to get a new supply of hemp. So in 1943, we grew 48,000 acres of hemp in Iowa, and we continued to grow more hemp throughout the war effort to supply the war effort. Unfortunately, in the 1950s, we went back to making hemp illegal again.
The government gave us the seeds too.
Yep. And that's why all the, everybody calls it Iowana or ditchweed or what have you, all around the state. What you see there, that's government genetics. That's actually government genetics that's crossed between each other over the last 60 or 70 years. That's why it's so valuable, is the fact that it's already accustomed to our topography, it's already accustomed to our climate, it's been growing here for 70 years, most of it is Roundup resistant, as you guys have all found out. So that's a very important part of the eventual bill we want to pass here in Iowa, is to make sure that we can use those seeds in developing our own cultivars. Yeah?
Is there any way to visually determine whether it is marijuana or hemp?
Yes, depends on the cultivar. Although some hemp cultivars can grow with very large flowers and very large buds, typically you need to test it. And testing it either through a lab analysis or some people take their own field tests of it. But no, on visual inspection there are some things that could look different. Typically a drug plant is going to have much fatter leaves. It's going to have maybe a stronger color. It's also going to be taken care of a lot better. So a drug plant, you get the most amount of money out of it, the best it grows, the least amount of seeds it has, the bigger the flowers. Hemp plants aren't necessarily like that. You don't need the big flowers. You need the seed. You don't need it to be without seeds. So it's different in that sense. But as far as knowing exactly what's in it, you need to do a chemical analysis.
Is the marijuana that grows, I guess, now wild, is it considered a heritage seed?
It's called, yeah, it's an heirloom seed, yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely. I wanted to go through a couple more things, but I don't want to go through too much of all of this data, except for right here. I want to talk about the market for hemp in the United States and sort of the ludicrous situation we find ourselves in. The United States is the single largest importer of hemp products. We're the single largest consumer of hemp products, and that goes from hemp seed as just a food to hemp seed oils, lotions. Some bioplastics aren't actually included in that, but most of it is food in the cosmetics industry and some specialty fabrics and things like that. It's nearly a $500 million market. It's projected to increase 3 times over the next 5 years if we don't grow any of that hemp here in the United States. 28 states have passed legislation. 8 states have started growing. Rick back here has grown when he's been involved in growing. But in general, states don't want to move forward because at the federal level, hemp is still classified as Schedule 1. Large-scale agriculture, large-scale farmers, they can lose their crop insurance, they can lose federal subsidies. If they're involved in any federal land grant programs, they can lose those. So farmers don't want to touch it with a 40-foot pole, obviously, unless there's regulation that allows it. And so we find ourselves in the precarious position where we send all our money to China or Canada, and that you can actually look at that right here. These are the U.S. hemp imports from Canada. 77% of the Canadian seed actually comes directly down to here to the U.S. All the fiber, all the fabric, so we have some hemp shirts back here. All of this comes from China for the most part. We don't grow any of it here. Our neighbors to the north, all those farmers are reaping in those rewards and the high prices. A little bit about growing hemp. It's about 90 to 120 days growing cycle. They are planted either broadcast seeding or rows, depending on what you're growing it for. Uses very few, almost no pesticides actually. It's pesticide resistant. Virtually no herbicides. You use natural fertilizers or manure on it. And it uses nearly about 1/3 to 1/2 of the water that corn requires. So all the input costs are actually lower than what you need for corn. Harvesting is very, yeah, go ahead.
Do you fertilize it?
You fertilize it, right?
Right. That's what we.
We told the soil before we were doing it, but we didn't require any fertilization.
It's pretty resilient. It'll grow very quickly, and especially on the herbicide side, you don't have to spray it because after a couple weeks, it's outgrowing everything around it. So from what I've heard, you spray it maybe for a couple weeks. Some farmers do, but most farmers actually aren't even spraying it. Which is pretty. It just grows. Yep.
Along the ditches, what do you think? Yeah. It's sprayed, they used to it too.
Now, one of the reasons I'm passionate about hemp for Iowa is because over the last few years we've developed some serious problems here. So we have some soil compaction issues. We have topsoil erosion. We have a lot of high nitrate levels in our water. We know Des Moines Water Works is suing those 3 counties. And really a lot of that is a result of our farming practices. It's the monocrop culture. It's corn, which has a very deep taproot, but it's fibrous, so it's very thin. And then soybean, which has a very, very shallow taproot, which doesn't penetrate down into the soil. We have soil compaction issues. We're not getting the soil aerated. We're not getting water deep into that soil to penetrate and getting nutrients very deep into it because of how we're farming. Hemp has a deep taproot. It goes down about 8 to 10 feet. Can be up to 3 inches in diameter, about 1.5 to 2.5 inches on average. And that, if you're planting either broadcasting or in rows, is really going to break up that soil. And it's going to allow those nutrients to seep back in. And when grown in rotation with corn and soy, in some studies in Europe, they've actually been able to boost yields on the corn and the soy up to 6 or 7%, just by rotating it in with hemp. Another advantage is that soy nematode is a big problem with soy, obviously. Hemp is naturally resistant to it. So if you put that into the rotation with your soy, it has actually been shown to decrease the instances of soy nematode in the soil and in your rotational soy crop. So what are we looking for in terms of hemp's future? A lot of what we talk about a lot on the bus is more than just selling seeds or selling fiber. We really talk about biorefineries. You know, Iowa is the leading state that's dealing with renewable fuels and renewable materials, plastics, biofuels, bioplastics. Hemp has a much higher cellulosic content than corn stover. It grows nearly twice as much per acre, maybe even 4 times per acre the biomass that corn stover can provide, and it's much easier to process. And when you process hemp stock, you can break it down into a number of different revenue streams. This is a picture of Pure Vision in Colorado. They're a biorefinery that's developing some technologies to actually process hemp. And as you can see here, you can create pulp, which goes into consumer paper products, industrial insulation, building products. In fact, we have some hemp paper back here to take a look at if you guys want to check it out. Lignins, those are bio-based raw materials. They go into isomers, into plastics, into paints. You know, any sort of petroleum-derived oils or anything like that you can derive from petroleum, you derive from oil, you can get from the hemp plant. Sugars, and obviously we can make food and beverage products. So we were talking about the day that we might have high fructose hemp sugar and not just high fructose corn sugar, because that is a possibility. There's actually somebody that's using those sugars to create a hemp vodka. So we have a hemp seed infused vodka here that's developed in Clive, Iowa, actually. But there's another person in Colorado that's looking to develop a hemp vodka that's actually coming from the sugars of the hemp plant. Yeah.
I do protein drinks.
Yeah.
And I've been buying hemp protein.
Yep.
So isn't it basically the same thing that we're talking about?
Yeah, that's exactly. So hemp protein comes from hemp seeds. And the hemp seeds, basically you crush them up and then you pull out that oil, and that seed cake that's left over is processed into a protein powder. It's actually, out of all the vegetation you can find in nature, it has the highest protein content in the seed. It has all 20 essential amino acids, and it also has omega-3, 6, and 9 fatty acids in it. So it's a complete superfood, actually. It's considered that. Hemp hearts are part of a very well-balanced breakfast, and I definitely recommend those. Some other revenue generation, obviously cannabinoids. So hemp, because the only restriction on hemp is less than 0.3% THC, there's a number of other medicinal cannabinoids available that don't get you high, but have very strong therapeutic effects. The one that we all have maybe heard about or passively have heard about is CBD. Rick back here has actually grown CBD hemp in Colorado. So that's what kids are using to control their seizures, for example. If you've heard about those stories, that's CBD. Doesn't get you high, but it's actually much more abundant in industrial hemp than it is in medical marijuana or medical cannabis. So hemp is actually a source of that. And finally, of course, seeds. The seeds can be used in food and cosmetics and in industrial applications for that oil as well. Hemp seed oil is a perfect biodiesel. I was at a company in Colorado called Sturman Industries, and they actually have a biodiesel engine that can run on straight hemp oil, unrefined. You just press seed oil, and they pour it right into the engine, and it works. So it's pretty incredible plant that it can produce all these different components. I'm going to keep going. So a little bit of numbers, and then I'm going to turn it over to Rick. Just some ideas on ethanol production. So corn, you're looking at stover about 8,500 pounds per acre, about 4.2 tons. That's going to give you at about 80 gallons per ton, about 340 gallons per acre that you can get of ethanol from corn stover. If we're going to look just at, and this is cellulosic ethanol, we're not talking about getting it from the actual corn seeds, we're actually talking about from the stover. On the hemp stalk, we're going to look at about 16,000 pounds per acre, or about 8 tons per acre, and that of course translates to double the oil that you can get per acre, or double the ethanol you can get from hemp stalk, from cellulosic ethanol, from hemp rather than corn stover. And that's not because it's a better plant, it's simply because it has a higher cellulosic content, first of all, which we didn't work into these numbers, but most of all because of the biomass. The biomass per acre just blows corn stover out of the water. A little bit about hemp seed and what you can make planting it based on some pretty conservative numbers, because when I was talking to Rick, he actually thinks the prices are higher. But these are pretty conservative numbers in terms of non-processed seed. On conventional non-organic, you can look at about $1,500 an acre in revenue based on current prices for seed. Compare that to, you know, what is 180 bushels and about $3.40 for corn right now. So that's about what, $700-800, right? A little bit more. So $800, and obviously we have a much higher input costs for corn. So it takes more spraying, it takes more fertilizer, it takes more water. Hemp takes less input costs and can double your revenue. If you're separating out the oil over here and into the seed cake, it works out to about $600 for the oil per acre, and then about $1,000 for the seed cake per acre. Yeah.
Can you do it organic?
Yeah, you can absolutely do organic.
Want it organic?
You know, because a lot of the hemp seeds are going into the food market and then going to health food stores, they're, you know, the organic side is definitely growing, but people buy conventional hemp seed as well. That's really a personal decision for the farmer.
Can you plant it year after year?
I don't know.
Generation crop, like,
Thomas Jefferson planted on the same plot for 14 years, so over and over and over the same. So you can use it as a rotational crop, and I think that's a good place to start because, as Boris said, it does increase yields. Tobacco farmers in Kentucky would use it to increase their yields 25-30% for tobacco. So you can plant it year over year, but I think you can also use it rotationally.
How hard is it to kill if you wanted to change your rotation? Change the plant at the corn. Is it?
Yeah, that's a great question. This is our second year of doing it. We're using the same land we used last year, the 300 acres we grew. We're using that in addition to quite a few more.
Is it like volunteer corn and beans?
I mean, it can probably grow. Well, when it grows, it provides, depending on the type, it provides such a canopy. If you plant it, the population density tight enough, it provides such a canopy that it takes out all the weeds. Although we have a problem with thistle and binderweed in Colorado, and literally I saw the stalk of the hemp, the binderweed, wrapped around it. It grew so fast, it just ripped that binderweed in half. It just ripped it out of the ground, which was awesome. Right? Killed the binderweed and kept the valuable weed, right? The hemp. So
we're killing our marijuana now with our chemicals, so I would assume if you want to kill a field off, you could easily.
And from an organic standpoint too, you can usually takes a couple, like 3 years or more to get your soil cleansed out. Hemp is what's called a bioaccumulator, so it takes the junk that's in the soil and it sucks it up, right? They use it they use it in Chernobyl in Russia to help clean up all the toxins. They used it. We're trying to get them to use it in Superfund sites. The EPA has issues, right, because it's hemp. But it pulls up, like the stuff coming from China, for example, some of the CBD coming from China, it would pull up all the heavy metals that are in the Chinese soil, right? Barium, arsenic, mercury, and these poor children were using this oil from the hemp, and that heavy metal would go through. So it was an issue. It's not positive in that if you're going to use it downstream as products, but it can suck up all the stuff in the soil. So you actually conceivably could get to a cleaner soil more quickly because the hemp the roots and all that will suck up all that stuff out of the soil.
Yeah.
With that being said, because like here when we plant corn, then the next year we do the soybeans because what it does suck out of the soil, the nutrients. So that will have something to do with him about how it affects the soil year after year.
So the plant, the root will go in and it's thick, right? And it will aerate. There's a lot of medicinal properties to the root too, but it will essentially aerate the soil for you, right? Down, it goes down 8 to 10 feet. And it's thick, so it lets the water get in there, right? And the roots suck up the junk, right? And then the canopy, right? So when it dies and the canopy falls and the leaves and all that, they have their high magnesium, nitrogen, phosphorus. It leaves the ground with a healthier topsoil for next year's planting. That's why you typically see an increase in your yields.
Yeah.
yes, so we had to do it the first
So when it's harvested, it's not cut like corn or beans, it's ripped up?
That's a good question. Rick can tell you some growing pains from harvesting last year. I was showing Jack some videos last time I was here, and unfortunately I don't have them pulled up. We have some other videos, but the Europeans have really taken, they're a few years ahead of us on this, and so they've developed some combines that have dual headers. So what they're doing is right now they actually have kind of what looks like a bean header on the top, and it's maybe like protruded out like 6 feet in front on regular like a John Deere W660 combine or something, and then they put a corn header on the bottom, and so they're cutting off the tops in front, and as they're coming in, then the corn header will take off the stalks at the bottom. And so that's how they're harvesting it. But you could, I mean, Rick harvested, you can tell him how you harvested it.
We did all sorts of stuff. So we had 300 acres and about 5 separate plots of land. And we mainly grew for seed, for viable seed for planting and for food, and for CBD, which CBD mainly comes from the fan leaves and the flowers, the bud part of the top of the plants. We tried the traditional harvesters. We're actually retrofitting, inventing a new harvester with different heads to do kind of what Boris was saying. You want to take the flower part off first. We kind of, some of it we mashed all together, and that didn't work out so well. I mean, some of it we hand harvested with, not OSHA standards, but essentially like weed whackers with chainsaw heads on the end. And we, I mean, you do what you got to do, right? And so we're out there doing that. We've tried a bunch of different ways. There are specific genetics if you're growing for CBD or seed or fiber, right? Fiber is tighter, longer stalks, right? Thicker stalks. Machinery that's already being used in China and in Europe that's being used exactly for this. I think as Americans we're going to invent something even better kind of down the road, and I think that's what's happening. We're doing that. Colorado Cultivars is doing it to some degree. But you're absolutely right. You want to get a clean. If you're going for CBD, you want the clean flower, and then you want to chop down underneath for the stalks, and you can strip those stalks, and then either red them, in the field. There's a couple different ways to pull the stalk, and Winnie will show us this a little bit later. But pull the stalk from the inside, which is the herd, right? The inside and the outside is like the fiber. So there's a couple different ways to get there, but we use traditional wheat harvesters, and then we retrofit it up for next year. So. It's definitely something that is available overseas, but it's only something we can fine tune here in the U.S.
And the interesting thing is John Deere actually makes a dual head combine for hemp. They just sell it in Europe, and they don't sell it here, which I thought was an interesting tidbit. Design here. Yeah. Actually, I want to give it over to Rick in just about 60 seconds if that's okay. I just want to run through a couple more uses of hemp so you guys are all aware. Has anyone ever heard of hempcrete? Awesome. Hempcrete is a very exciting new building material. Started being developed in France and now kind of making its way west and also down south, down under in Australia and New Zealand. It's not structural, but when a house is built with hempcrete, it's used as insulation, about 12 up to 18 inches insulation, and it can have an R factor of up to 40. So people that understand construction, they know the houses typically are built with an R factor of 12, maybe 13 if you're lucky, 15 if you're lucky, and that's basically the higher it is, the better insulation you have, so the less energy costs you have in the summer to cool down, and the less energy costs you have in the winter to heat up. So hemp can have an R factor of up to 40. It's also carbon negative, which means it actually utilizes less CO2, or emits less CO2 than it takes in the production of hempcrete, and it also solidifies over time, so the hempcrete actually gets harder over time as it sits there in your house, which is pretty impressive. This is actually a hempcrete house that was, where was this built? This is in the U.S. North Carolina, right? This is in North Carolina. Yep, North Carolina. And that's them putting it in right there, and it's a very beautiful house. You can go online and check it out. There's a lot of pictures of the interior. Cars. The i3, Dodge, Mercedes, these guys are all using hemp bioplastics because they're 30% lighter than the regular Tor plastic panels that they've been using, but they're also much, much stronger than the plastic they've been using. So BMW, like I said, Mercedes, Dodge, they're all experimenting in the i3 right now. The entire interior is made out of a combination of hemp and flax plastic.
How long have they been using it for manufacturing?
Last few years, they've really gotten into it. I mean, hemp, like maybe 3 years. I mean, BMW just released the i3, so that was really the first one. I think the 7 Series is going to have some hemp plastic in it, the new 5 Series and new 3 Series as well. So this is sort of where they're testing it out. I think all their electric cars going forward are going to have hemp plastic in them.
Can you mention the building about the mold and the fire? And
Oh yeah. So with hempcrete, this is actually very, very, very cool. And you're right. Thank you for reminding me. I was at a hempcrete building workshop in Michigan, and they demonstrated the fire retardant capabilities of hempcrete. So they made an entire brick out of hempcrete, and they had a fire going. So they put the brick directly in the fire. We walked away for 45 minutes. When we came back, you could pick the brick right out of the fire. The bottom was very, very hot, and the other side was completely cool. The only time I've ever seen anything like that was in 7th grade when somebody from Nassau came and showed us the space shuttle tiles, and they put a flamethrower on there on one side and the other side remained cool. That's the only time I've ever seen that happen in my life. So that's a pretty impressive thing. It's complete fire retardant, and it's mold resistant, and it's antibacterial. So as a building material, it would be very, very useful of keeping the inside of your house very clean and antimicrobial.
And it's breathable.
And it's breathable. That's why it's so high in insulation, is that there's that air pockets inside, so the air inside gets either warmed up or cooled down, and that's what provides the insulation around your entire house.
And pest resistant.
And pest resistant, thank you.
There's a hempcrete brick over here that I put together on the 17th of January. I attended the same workshop in Colorado, and that was put together back there in a little box. You can see it, hempcrete. And
I
they
heard
built
that it's 7
in
times
Colorado,
stronger
up in
than
the mountains,
concrete.
they have a hempcrete house that's 1,500 square feet that they just finished in September. So,
I want to make sure it's not structural, so it's not stronger than concrete.
No,
It's
as
more
it-
it's more insulating than concrete.
more insulating, but from what I've read, as it gets to
Over
the
time, it
elements,
gets harder.
it can actually be
Yeah.
as strong, if not stronger, than concrete.
It wants to go back, the lime wants to go back into the stone, so eventually it'll be like a stone.
Yeah, eventually it will be much harder. Yes. Yes.
Just to clarify, it's not load bearing, so meaning you
Yeah.
can't support the roof. But so you can structural meaning you can put it, you can make walls out of it, you can make the ceiling out of it, you can make floors out of it. But it won't. You still need a frame structure. The house in Colorado, the house here in North
I've done nothing
Carolina,
but stucco,
you
so
need
I
to have like your
understand.
timber frame or your frame, and then the hempcrete becomes your wall. In Colorado, we classify it as a straw built house.
Like inside your walls. for-
And inside the walls, yeah, and even then you can stucco or you can wall it, whatever you want to do on top.
In Spain they're mixing it with clay
Yeah.
and making clay bricks, which is structural.
And with that, I'd want to introduce Rick, and he's going to just talk to you guys a little bit about what they did last year in Colorado. He's already answered some of your questions, but go ahead and ask him as many as you can. We're really lucky to have him here, and then Winnie's going to give us a demonstration on how to make rope from hemp.